All right, let's dive into a story out of Nigeria that honestly feels like it was ripped straight from a political thriller. It's a wild ride about crime, a really confusing justice system, and how some people, it seems, can get away with just about anything.
The whole thing really boils down to one single baffling question. Just try to wrap your head around this. How does a man who was convicted for laundering billions of naira, money went for retirees, by the way,
How does that guy end up winning an award for upholding the rule of law?
yeah, you heard that right. It sounds completely made up, but as we're about to see, this actually happened.
So, the man at the very center of this whole storm is Abdul Rashid Mina. He's a former public official, and his story takes this absolutely unbelievable turn after he gets out of prison.
You know, the author of the article we're drawing from really nails it with this quote. It's pretty much the only way to make sense of the news that a branch of the Nigerian Bar Association, the actual lawyers sworn to uphold the law, gave Mina an award. Well, as you can imagine, the backlash was pretty instant. The national leadership of the Bar Association came out and condemned the whole thing. They even started disciplinary action. But the damage was already done. Milana, of course, used the platform to claim that he was the one being persecuted. It just makes you wonder, how on earth did we get to this point?
Okay, so to understand that bizarre award, we have to rewind. We've got to go back to the original crime that put Maitrina in the headlines in the first place. Abdul Rashid Mina's job title was head of the Pension Reform Task Team. Literally, his one job was to protect the funds of people who had retired. Instead, he was convicted of laundering a massive amount of money from that exact fund. And the amount was just staggering. He was convicted of laundering 2 billion naira. That's millions and millions of US dollars. This wasn't some petty fraud. This was a full-blown heist. During the trial, the judge basically laid out the math. And it's devastatingly simple. Look at this. A civil servant making around 300,000 naira a month could never, ever legally save up 2 billion in an entire career. The numbers, they just don't add up, not even close. So how did he do it? Well, the prosecution laid out this whole elaborate scheme. We're talking fake names, a shell company. He even used the personal details of his own relatives to open fraudulent accounts. It was so bad that his own siblings actually testified against him in court. But believe it or not, the story gets even weirder. Mina's journey from being accused to actually being convicted, well, it wasn't exactly a straight line. It was more like a chaotic saga of escapes and these totally bizarre comebacks. I mean, just look at this timeline. It's pure chaos. He flees the country in 2013. Then, get this, in 2017, while he is still an international fugitive, he is secretly brought back into the civil service and promoted. After a huge public outcry, he gets arrested, only to flee again in the middle of his trial, before finally being tracked down and rearrested by Interpol in another country. And this is where the author we're looking at just hits the nail on the head with this line. The argument is that this wasn't some serious, gritty pursuit of justice. It was more like a public performance, a piece of theater for everyone to watch. So after all that drama, he was finally convicted. You'd think, okay, that's the end of the story, right? Nope, not even close. So officially, Mina was convicted. The evidence was overwhelming. His shell company was ordered to be shut down. On paper, it looked like a major win for the justice system. But here's where what's on paper and what happens in reality just completely diverge. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. But then he was quietly released after serving just a little over half of that time. And there was no real official explanation, no public announcement, nothing. The source material sums up the impact with this really haunting phrase. I mean, the whole point of a strong sentence is to deter other people from doing the same thing. But the author argues that by cutting it short without any explanation, the very idea of deterrence was just quietly shown the door. And all of this brings us to the author's final conclusion. Because the verdict here isn't really just about Abdul Rashid Mina. It's about the entire system that made his story possible in the first place. The author argues that Mina's case is basically forensic evidence of a broken system. A system where the so-called fight against corruption is more of a rehearsal than a real war. A place where sentences are totally flexible and getting convicted is just a temporary setback. And this final quote from the source just says it all, doesn't it?
The argument is that for the powerful, corruption isn't something that ends your career. It's just a brief interruption before you come back to public life, sometimes with even more awards. So, the story of Abdul Rashid Maina leaves us with this really fundamental question. And based on all the evidence laid out in this case, the source material suggests a pretty deeply unsettling answer about what justice really means in Nigeria today.